Hello and welcome to Agents of Nonprofit. My name is Alexander Lapa, and I'm here to speak with everyday superheroes helping nonprofits. Joining me today is Maria Rio to talk about community-centric fundraising. Maria, welcome to the show.
Hi, great to be here.
So, I love starting the episode by asking you, what is your superhero origin story?
That's such a fun question. My superhero origin story, I think it started with other people helping me and how that impacted me in a way where I wanted to help others. Like knowing that there was people out there that were trying to make other people's lives better and easier was always really inspiring, and it's something that I've taken with me forever. So my superhero story started when I came to Canada as a refugee when I was 9 years old. I lived in a World Vision refugee shelter. And then when I was old enough to start fundraising at the baby age of 19, I started fundraising as a face-to-face fundraiser with a company called Public Outreach, because they were also fundraising for World Vision at the time. So I saw them, they were wearing the vests that said World Vision, pitching people on the street to give monthly. And it's something that I felt really aligned with who I wanted to be.
Awesome. So, that was your first kind of foray into the nonprofit world. Was that around 19? Or did you have like a couple other experiences beforehand so that by the time you got to 19, you said you kind of had a feeling this could be for you?
So a lot of my experiences were as a service user, so like using food banks, clothing banks, helping getting help with my immigration status, that kind of stuff. So like not a lot of the fundraising side up until I think 19. I did in high school, like we had like Me to We, Free the Children, Helping Hands kind of stuff at school where I would fundraise for it and like bake sales. But I think I started pretty young. So it was like one of my first interactions with nonprofit as a sector on the non-receiving side.
So that's beautiful to be to know the benefits of nonprofits, to see it yourself firsthand, and then want to participate in it to pass it or pay it forward. I guess they call it, right, to spread the love and the support that you received, and try to be able to allow others to receive the same kind of level or better support than you received. It's a wonderful story.
I actually wanted to get into law as a prosecutor, but then like it just unfortunately didn't work out. Like I moved out when I was 17, so there's no way that I could have like covered it myself, law school. So it was like my other way of like doing something for justice, for a better world because people had done it for me. And what I thought was unique was that I could like talk to people directly and say like I was helped by this, you know? And I thought that would make a difference in like inspiring them to give. But yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
Awesome. So, topic today, community-centric fundraising. I'll call it CCF for short. I'm curious if you could start by giving maybe a high-level definition of, what does that mean for you?
Entering communities, so people who have the most lived experience of an issue. So, for example, is it okay that we have boards full of people who have never experienced, let's say incarceration, serving a community that has all experienced that, right? So, there's a really big gap between where our boards are, our leadership is, and where the community is. And a lot of the time, like we don't understand the nuances and the barriers that someone might be facing if we don't have that lived experience. And even when we do, like, as I said, like I've experienced poverty, I don't know what it's like to experience that today. So, like, really connecting with people and like hearing their stories, hearing what they're going through, and centering their experiences in decision making, I think is the most important part for me.
I think that you're right. The board should have, or at least some people on the board should have experience about what it's like to be on the receiving end of some of the benefits that the nonprofit is doing. What's your opinion though about having someone with fresh eyes? I know that sometimes people can get into a sound machine where you just keep on hearing the same thing over and over again, and sometimes having someone fresh with fresh eyes, different perspective, can also add to the conversation.
Yes and no. Like I sometimes I find like if you have too many different kind of perspectives, you're kind of rowing in different directions. And we're at a time where we really need to be rowing in the same direction. So Like if you have a different take of on our beliefs or our programs or how the board should be run, like it's kind of going to cause more friction than it might be worth in the long term. Not saying that it should be an echo chamber at all, but just be measured when it comes to who you're bringing on the board and how much of a devil's advocate they're going to play on it.
That was the word I was looking for, echo chamber. Yeah, thank you for that.
No problem.
Yeah, but I agree. I mean, you're right. Values, mission, perspective, those I think should always be as closely aligned as possible. So you're right. I think maybe the takeaway from that is really just be mindful of who you are bringing onto the board to make sure that they have something to add, but they're not too far away from where you want to go.
Yeah, and not everyone's role on the board will be like lived experience person, personality hire, or whatever you want to call it, right? Like you want people to be contributing equally in whatever they that means. So like for example, if someone's a lawyer, like are they actually bringing their law expertise or are they charging per hour, right? Like kind of thinking about like what they bring to the table for free for the purpose of the cause, right? And it can't just be like, well, I am a lawyer, but I'm not going to advise.
So for CCF, is this a relatively new term? Like I don't remember hearing about this, 20 years ago. Maybe I was just not I was out of the loop and it was always existed from day one. But I had the sense of that this is more of a more modern perspective. I was curious to know, like, if you know any origins of the principles or the perspective that it entails, and where and when did basically it originate?
Yeah, so CCF as a concept, I think is about 8 years old, something around that. I think it was first mentioned as a term on Vu Lei's blog, Nonprofit AF, unless it was nonprofits with balls at the time. But anyways, Nonprofit AF talking about how this isn't exactly working for the sector. Like people are still suffering. There's still societal barriers, and why is that the case? So, from my understanding, Vu and a bunch of other fundraisers of color in Seattle kind of got together and started thinking about this as a broader movement and came to terms with these 10 principles. So, once they had the 10 principles, they were able to actually like rally people around it with the audience that Vu built on the blog, but also like launch it as a formal movement. So, it's been growing for a while, but I think it started as a very small idea in Boulet's head.
I like that word, nonprofit AF. That's cute.
Yeah, it's
Uh,
awesome.
because sometimes you need to be a bit provocative in order to create change. So 10 principles you mentioned. I was wondering if we could go through each of the 10, maybe give a brief definition and what it actually means and or how a nonprofit would apply it in order to be more CCF.
Sure. Before we dive into that, I just want to say that CCF is more of a lens because each organization has a different set of circumstances that might deter them from implementing a CCF thing. So, for example, I was a manager at a unionized workplace, and one of the CCF kind of like things that you can do is provide more funding for professional development for racialized individuals who might not have had these opportunities earlier in their career. But since I worked at a unionized workplace, I wasn't able to do that. Right. So just like really thinking through each principle and how it applies to your individual position and organization, I think is really important. So think of it as more of a lens that you see fundraising through rather than like a checklist of like, oh, this is CCF aligned, because it'll be different at each organization.
So actually, that's a good point. I would love to jump into that. If it's a lens and it's just more of principles, we're not encouraging, like, are we encouraging people to follow it as much as possible? Or at least, even if you do one of the 10, that's good enough. Like, what would be your recommendation for a nonprofit? Like, should it be an adoption that everybody should take? Is it only for certain nonprofits? And if nonprofits want to do it, like, how would they even start doing it?
Yeah. So I think that all nonprofits should adopt it. It is the least harmful out of the two fundraising models that we have right now, donor-centric and community-centric. That being said, it's not absolutely not harmful, right? But it is the least harmful. So that's kind of what we're looking to do as organizations, really dismantle systems of oppression in our fundraising, in our communications, in our HR, in our governance. So CCF principles can be applied to any part of your organization. It doesn't just have to stick with fundraising. but it's kind of overarching values guiding the work. So if you believe in these values, then this might be a great fit for your organization. So let's dive into the 10 principles.
So before we jump into the principles, then, just to compare and contrast, so how would you compare at a high level the donor-centric fundraising approach versus the community-centric fundraising approach?
I think the fundamental difference between donor-centric fundraising and community-centric fundraising is where we place power, focus, and accountability, decision-making support in between the two models, right? So donor-centric fundraising prioritizes donor preferences and fundraising success as its primary objectives, while community-centric fundraising is about centering equity, championing systemic change, and community empowerment.
Okay, cool. So let's jump in then. Let's go through the 10 as you said. So starting with number one, I'll let you read the title and then explain it.
Great. So there's 10 principles right now. And as I said, these are kind of values, right? So the first one is fundraising must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice. So if your organization believes that in theory, CCF is kind of the tools to which you can implement it, right? So fundraising must be grounded in race, equity, and social justice is, we're here for societal change. We're not just here to get dollars in and dollars out. Like we really need to focus on what is our end goal. And fundraising is not about, fundraising for fundraising's sake, right? It's like, what do you want to see in the world? The second one is individual organizational missions are not as important as the collective community. I'm sure this is a problem that many of your listeners can relate to, working in silos, whether it's in your own, one person fundraising department or your organization as if you're the ED of it, right? So like not being able to have that peer support. Nonprofits are generous with and mutually supportive of one another, very related. This is about sharing resources, right? So whether that's attention, which is a huge resource right now, or, working together with one HR person across 3 organizations, like there's really interesting ways that we're seeing people apply this. The next principle is all who engage in strengthening the community are equally valued, whether volunteer, staff, donor, or board member. This one is really interesting. It's kind of removing the pedestal of any person involved. So it's not your board member that's the hierarchical decision maker, and it's not your donor, and it's maybe not even your ED, right? So it's like, how do you actually make decisions in a way where everyone feels powerful? And it's different per organization as well, but it's interesting to think about. The next one is time is valued equally as money. So if someone volunteers, do they get stewarded? So how do you actually show gratitude and appreciation to people who are putting in blood, sweat, and tears and not money? We treat donors as partners, and this means that we are transparent and occasionally have difficult conversations. I think this can be true in donor-centric and community-centric fundraising models, is having these conversations with donors about like why is nonprofit not solving societal issues? Why is it not enough? Right? And just having them kind of think about it a little bit more critically about like, what are they doing? What are we doing? And how can we actually support people with that long-term collective liberation? The next one is we foster a sense of belonging, not othering. So this can be really clear in storytelling, how you talk about your service users. Do you say like, oh, these like people messed up in life and that's why they're poor, Or do you say like people, even if they work 2 to 3 jobs, can face barriers to breaking out of poverty, right? It's a completely different framing, but one fosters belonging and empowerment, and another one fosters othering and, disempowerment. Okay, 3 more to go. So we promote the understanding that everyone, donors, staff, funders, board members, and volunteers, personally benefits from engaging in the work of social justice. So it's not just charity and compassion. Basically, everyone who's contributing should feel like they're working towards that goal, right? So what is that goal? Whether that's advocacy or, more bike lanes, whatever your organization does, like we're all working towards that and we all benefit from it. So I get to feel like I'm making a difference, right? And my community gets to feel that they're making a difference. So it's all of us together rowing in the same direction. Second last, we see the work of social justice as holistic and transformative, not transactional. Community-centric fundraising is all about the community. So, like, not just your service users, not just your donors, not just your board, but everyone coming together to say, like, what is the change that we want to see in the world, right? It's kind of like why protesting works. Like, we're here together, we're here in community to make sure our voices get heard. And the last one is we recognize that healing and liberation requires a commitment to economic justice. So there's this really good quote by Martin Luther King, and it's, you can't have peace without justice, right? So we can have the illusion of peace, but we know that a lot of people are kind of exploited through systemic racism, capitalism, ableism, all the isms, right? So we can have the illusion of things are okay, but they're not really for a large chunk of the population. So this last principle is about recognizing that it's about justice and not peace or anything like that. And through justice, we will have that collective healing.
So that was quite a lot to digest. I'm curious if there is, so again, these are lenses, these are perspectives, principles. So the more you follow them, the more community centric you can say you are. I'm curious, is there like a starting point? If you had to choose, like, is there if you had to start with one, or you recommend starting with one or two of them or three of them, depending on how ambitious you are, like, is there a particular one that you find has more priority or more importance to start with, and then the other ones can follow? Or is it more like follow what you can to receive as many benefits as possible?
I think it's more of the second one, like follow the ones that you can, because sometimes, and look, I've been there, I've been an in-house fundraiser where I'm like, well, how am I going to get rid of this super elitist gala if I need to make the money, or how am I going to convince my board, right? So something that someone told me, I think it was Sarah Stager, is like, you don't actually need permission to become a CCF aligned fundraiser. Like, you could start framing stories in a different way, right? When that's more empowering, and you could start asking for consent of sharing the stories and like consent to publish it. Like, there's different things that you can do that will immediately just reduce harm, right? So pick where you can. I think the most important step is the next one. So don't worry about getting it perfect, getting it right before you start. Just start, because it is a very new thing. So some of it feels like reinventing the wheel, and everything's kind of different for each organization. So the only thing that you can do is try to assess what would be the next best step and then take it forward. But I would love to kind of give some examples of what people can do, just
Yep.
so it's not as intangible if
Abstract.
they haven't heard of this concept before.
Sure, sounds good.
So how can we apply community-centric fundraising, right? So we can recruit and do professional development of Black, Indigenous, and people of color. We can educate our boards, our leadership, and donors on anti-capitalism, anti-racism, and community-centric fundraising. We can learn about the nonprofit industrial complex and accept that we're part of it. We can be choosy of where we show up and take up space and who we take funds from. We can be clear about how values are operationalized across our organization and develop a gift acceptance policy or a gift recognition policy. We could do things that prioritize the collective mission. So whether that's public policy work or turning away opportunities for communities that you're not a part of, pushing back on problematic notions. So if you're talking to a politician and they say something problematic about your community, like, you can really bring it back to that collective mission and understanding. You could do dignified storytelling, inclusive design, like even your website, like setting up the contrast, like all of this works towards moving forward the idea of social justice.
A lot of great examples. Thank you for sharing that. Are there any particular or any specific benefits to following these kinds of principles? I mean, I know it might be an odd question, but I'm like, if an organization isn't quite following them now, but they kind of have a desire to, sometimes in order to be able to start the change, again, it's not asking permission, but at least trying to get others on board, rather than saying, we should do this. If you have a story of saying we should do this because we will then be able to do that, like, it makes the story and the argument a little stronger. So I was wondering if you could share any kind of benefits that a message like that could add to the conversation.
Absolutely. I feel like most leaders, though, they're not looking for the benefits. They're looking to assuage their own fear. Like, if
Mm.
I change anything about my fundraising, no one will give me money ever again. And I totally get that. I feel like I felt like that, like starting at new jobs where it's like, oh my God, no one's gonna give, Why would no one give, right? Like they still care about the cause. Like they want to be a part of it, they want to learn. So the first one would be like deal with your own fear. Like it's something different, it's something new, and it's something super exciting. Um, the next step would be, really aligning your values with your fundraising is something that many leaders want to do. So once you can start moving that forward, and some of the differences between donor-centric and community-centric is so traditionally donor-centric has been about positioning the person in the light of pity. So like not dissing World Vision or, international development organizations, but we all remember those ads from like 10 years ago with like kids covered in flies, picking up tiny grains of rice from the floor. That's very donor-centric gold. It's all about like guilting you into making that gift and like making you feel bad. But one of the like really negative aspects of that is that I'll make the gift as the donor, but the attrition rate of someone who's guilted into making a donation versus empowered is like hugely different. So that's why if you pay close attention to international development marketing now, it's all about empowerment, right? So Plan International has the Because I'm a Girl campaign, and that's all about like, look how powerful she is. Look at the change she's making in community X, Y, and Z. So like by transitioning your storytelling, you're more likely to keep your donors, which is awesome. We all want that. Live up to your values. Again, awesome. We all want that. And anecdotally, when I talk to donors about this, they're like, yes, that makes so much sense. So donors are already thinking about this. I I have found that donors are way ahead and they're thinking about their uh, positional power and relationship to their own wealth, relationship to the broader community, to like um, their taxes, their DAFs. Like they're all thinking about this so deeply if they're anywhere on the spectrum of, left alignment. But nonprofits aren't being brave enough to have those conversations. And they're thinking like, oh, same old, same old. But we know that most people who give, they give because of a sense of community and obligation to that community. So when that's reduced and we're working in very like individualized manners, then you're just reducing donor attrition to your own organization, which is not exactly what you want to do. So not only is there kind of like it's the right thing to do, but it's the profitable thing to do.
I mean, you give me the sense that community-centric fundraising is just a superior model to the donor-centric fundraising. Is that true, or is there some scenarios where donor-centric is the better option because of X, Y, or Z?
So I think it's kind of a decision that each organization has to make for themselves and what alignment with their values it has, right? So it can be very different if you lean into it hard, but it can be a rebranded version of donor-centric fundraising if you do it in a piecemeal manner, right? So like are you going to have difficult conversations with your donors? Like if Harvey Weinstein comes up to you and he's like, I want to give you $1 million and no one will know, if you take the money, is that more donor centric? If you reject the money, is that more community centric? Like all of this depends on your organization's values.
Right. But is there ever a moment where one model is just better, will give you better outcomes than the other? Like, is there a situation where you would recommend an organization follow a donor-centric fundraising model as opposed to the CCF model?
I don't think so. I'm trying to think of like the different aspects of a fundraising model. So like the role of the community, the power dynamics, competition between nonprofits, transparency, the primary goal of fundraising. And I just think community centric fundraising comes on top for me for all of these things. I think one of the things that like donor centric fundraisers say is like, no, we don't want to be mean to our donors. We care about our donors. Like it's not rude to care about them and it's not anti-social justice. And I think that that is something that they get wrong. Like it's all about bringing people along together. So I think based on that, I don't think there's anything that I would say like donor centric is the way to go.
So to extrapolate even further and to really underline this point, if you had magic power that allowed nonprofits to switch, at least gradually over time, from a donor-centric model to a community-centric model, would you say yes? This is just everyone or all organizations, all nonprofit organizations should follow this model at some point in the future, or you would love to see it happen in that way?
I think that would be great. I know that a lot of organizations right now, I think there was a study that I wrote about 3% of the organizations in the States currently advocate, will 100% have the ability to do so. So, if we had 100% uptake in CCF, then that means that a lot of other organizations would be doing public policy work, which will someday reflect systemic change. So that to me alone would be worth it. And then also kind of trying to tackle the idea of the nonprofit industrial complex to me would also be worth it. Like everyone kind of, what role does nonprofit play?
I don't know the answer to that question, but it's a good question to ask. Any thoughts onto where the future, because it's only 8 years old, this term and these principles. Do you see it still in its infancy? Is there some still growth to happen to it? Or is it more now a matter of just trying to increase adoption?
Oh, that's a really interesting question because I'm actually not 100% sure. Because with the murder of George Floyd, like we saw a huge uptick in organizations and leaders being like, I'm not racist. Look at me. I got my black square posted. Like CCF sounds good, blah, blah, blah. But with increasing pressure on nonprofit leaders and boards and X, Y, and Z to lean into the fear, to say, like, well, it's not safe right now to advocate. Like, let's just wait until this whole Trump thing blows over or whatever, right? Like, there's so much pressure for people to lean into the fear. And I also find that very natural, right? Like, it's very hard to fight the urge to stick your head in the sand. So I don't know. I feel like that will scare some people from trying to advocate and trying to, challenge the status quo. I think it's an interesting time because we really need the funders who are left leaning to give like, 10-year grants, not 2 years, not super tied with strings. Like the right is like super well funded, and the left needs to be as well. And anything to do with like alleviating human suffering usually falls on the left side of the nonprofit world. So yeah, I think it's a difficult time ahead for organizations looking to do things differently, but I also feel like organizations that choose to do things the same will suffer in the long term.
Are there any other thoughts that you'd like to share with our listeners?
I think the
'Cause
last thing that I would like to add is that the work of justice is not easy and it's not for the faint of heart. I have published a lot on CCF and I'm still scared. Like I still walk into a conference room that I'm going to speak at and I'm like, oh my God, will people question like why do we care about solving racism? Like it still feels very personal. So like if you feel that fear, like it's very human. I'm sure even the great Boule, feels fear sometimes. And it's all about taking that next step, right? So don't focus on perfections. Don't focus on, all the things that could go wrong. Just take that one next step to move closer towards, justice and equity for your community. And if we all do that, it just makes the world a little bit better.
I agree. And it change is always uncomfortable, but history has shown that when people are courageous enough to initiate and to lead and to let people follow and encourage them, and eventually there's a tipping point where we are able to get more equity and a better outcome for everybody.
Amnesty International has this saying, it's better to light a candle than to curse the darkness. And that's
Mm.
something that to me feels so aligned. Like I would rather hold on to my little candle, no matter how windy it is, than to give up. Right. So just don't lean into the fear. Let it go through your body. Take the time that you need to like settle yourself and then get back into the fight. Little steps will take us far.
Yeah, this is great. I'm curious, I'm hoping people have additional questions for you. So if they do, how could they get in touch with you?
Absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Maria Rio, RIO. You could follow my podcast at the Small Nonprofit Podcast, or you could check out my website at gofurthertogether.ca. I do a lot of like releases of like thought pieces and resources that if you are thinking of implementing this, you'll find something good for you there.
Awesome. We'll add that to the show notes as well. So thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you so much for doing what you do and lighting that candle.
Thank you, Alex.
All right, that's it for today. I am Alexander Lapa, and I hope you join me again in the next Agents of Nonprofit.